In video 6, we discovered that materialism simply can't ground moral obligation. That's because matter only describes what is, not what we ought to do. We came away from video 7 understanding that moral authority is real and that it's embedded in reality itself, and that accountability is personal and built into reality as well. And so in today's video, we're going to examine something very deep about the moral authority that grounds personal accountability. Life's lived experiences remind us that moral authority addresses each of us directly and calls us to account. It does so by producing thoughts and feelings of accountability in us, such that we find ourselves feeling answerable to something, or possibly even to someone. For example, think about something very simple. Think about the last time you knew you had done something wrong. Maybe you said something unfair to someone. Maybe you acted selfishly. Maybe you cut a moral corner you knew you shouldn't have. Now think about what happened afterward. When things got quiet, something inside you spoke clearly, but not out loud. It said something like this: "You shouldn't have done that." It often even calls us out by name. Now here's the question I want to explore with you today. Why does that experience feel so personal? Hello, I'm Braden, and welcome to my channel, Dispelling the Accusatory Fog. This particular series of videos I'm doing is titled Faith, Reason, and a Search for Truth. It's where Reason and I are exploring some of the deepest questions about reality, morality, and belief. In the last video, video 7, we looked at something very important. We saw that moral authority appears to be real and not just a social agreement, not just chemistry, but something that actually binds us. In today's video, we're going to explore this by asking the next question that follows the natural flow of reasoning, and that is, why does moral authority feel like it addresses you personally? We ended video 7 somewhere important. We didn't try to prove God. We didn't jump into theology. We simply followed the evidence as far as it would take us. What we observed was something that most people already know, but don't often stop to think about. Moral authority appears to be real, not invented, not just a social agreement, not just chemistry happening inside the brain. Moral authority binds us. It confronts us. It speaks with the kind of authority that we recognize immediately. But today I want to look at something that sits just beneath that experience. Something most of us feel but rarely analyze. We'll do so by asking this simple question: why does accountability feel so personal? Let's start with something everyone has experienced. You say something you shouldn't have said. You treat someone unfairly. You cut a corner morally because it wasn't convenient. And later, when things quiet down, something inside you speaks. Not out loud, but clearly. And what it's saying is usually very simple. You shouldn't have done that. Now notice something interesting about that moment. Your brain might be involved. Chemistry might be involved. Neurons are certainly firing off. But chemistry does not speak in the language of accusation. Molecules don't confront you. Atoms don't say, "You should have done better." And yet, something in us clearly is speaking to us in that way. When you violate a moral obligation, something inside you doesn't just register consequences. It registers responsibility. You feel accountable. And that's a very different experience because accountability always raises a question. Accountable to what? When conscience speaks, it doesn't feel like background noise. It feels directed, almost like a spotlight has turned on. You suddenly see your actions more clearly. You recognize that you crossed a line. And here's the strange part about that recognition. It often feels like more than just self-reflection. It feels like exposure, as if what you did matters in a deeper way, as if it matters beyond convenience, beyond opinion, and beyond whether anyone else even noticed. And that lived experience is remarkably universal. People across cultures recognize it. They recognize it across history and all belief systems. That feeling of moral exposure seems to be built right into every human's lived experiences, which raises an important question. Why? Now let's slow down and make an important distinction. There's a difference between regret and guilt. Regret says, I wish that hadn't happened. Guilt says, I shouldn't have done that. Regret can happen when circumstances go badly, but guilt only happens when we've chosen to do something we know we shouldn't have done. Guilt prompts us and helps us recognize responsibility for our actions. In our heart, we feel the weight of it: conscious, guilt, accountability. And in our mind, we recognize the truth of it: reason, understanding, responsibility. And responsibility implies something very specific. It implies that we could have done otherwise. It implies that a real standard existed, and it implies that we failed to meet it. That's a very different kind of reality than simple cause and effect. If moral authority binds us regardless of our preferences, then it can't simply come from us, because if we invented it, we can dismiss it whenever it becomes inconvenient. But that's not how moral obligation behaves in our lived experiences. It presses on us, it confronts us, it persists even when we would prefer it disappear, which suggests that moral authority may not originate inside the human mind at all, although it resides in us. What I'm saying is that it may be embedded in reality itself, something structural. These symbolic pillars I'm showing here communicate that moral truths are not inventions. They are load-bearing parts of the structure of reality itself. They represent something deeper than culture. There's something that we encounter rather than create. It's called the law, which exists objectively, but, as I just said, human beings encounter it internally. And here is where the question becomes even more interesting. Moral obligation doesn't just feel real, it feels personal. When conscience speaks, it doesn't sound like physics. It sounds like a voice addressing you. You feel known, you feel answerable. You feel like your actions matter in a way that goes beyond social approval. Now, think about that carefully. If the universe is nothing more than particles in motion, why would those particles generate the experience of moral accountability? In other words, why would blind chemistry produce the feeling that someone knows what you did? Why would matter produce the sense that your choices carry real moral weight? Those are not trivial questions. They point towards something deeper. And it makes reason ask, if moral obligation feels so personal, maybe the source of moral authority is personal too. Now let's pause for a moment and look at something we all recognize from our own lived experience. This isn't just philosophy. This is something every human being has felt. There are moments in life when we, in our knowers, know with uncomfortable clarity that we have crossed the moral line. Maybe no one even saw it. Maybe no one even knows about it. But we know about it. We lived it. And in those moments, something happens inside us that is very difficult to explain. The universe is nothing more than matter in motion. We feel answerable. That's the key word. Not merely regretful, not merely disappointed in ourselves. Answerable. It feels as though something in reality itself is calling us to account for what we did, requiring that we answer for it personally. Now think about that carefully. Gravity never asks you to explain yourself. Chemistry never demands an answer. And physics never confronts you about your behavior. But moral law does. And that experience is remarkably consistent across human history. People may disagree about many things. Cultures may vary in their customs, but the experience of moral accountability shows up everywhere. Human beings feel that their actions matter in a way that goes beyond convenience or preference. They feel that some things are genuinely right and some things are genuinely wrong. And when they violate those standards, something inside them says, you should not have done that. Now here's the important observation. That experience doesn't behave like an impersonal force. It behaves like something addressing a person. Conscience doesn't merely describe our actions, it confronts us, it calls us to account. It speaks in the language of responsibility. And responsibility is always personal. It is moral reality that's confronting us, something embedded in reality itself. In his book, Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis introduced an argument he called the moral law argument, or sometimes the argument from conscience. Lewis begins with a simple observation about everyday life. When people disagree about morality, they argue as if someone is actually wrong. That means people instinctively believe there is a real standard of right and wrong. Lewis called this moral law, which leads us to an important realization. If moral authority is real, and if moral accountability feels personal, then the moral structure of reality may be pointing towards something deeper than impersonal forces, something capable of grounding moral law itself, something capable of addressing persons. Without jumping ahead, let's simply follow the evidence one step farther. And as we do, we will find that moral authority doesn't behave like gravity. It behaves like something that addresses persons and holds them accountable. And that leads us to the obvious next question. If moral authority addresses each of us directly, does that imply mind is behind it? Which is the topic we'll be addressing in video 9. Moral law is embedded in reality itself. It isn't invented by people. It isn't cultural preference. It is simply part of the structure of reality. That observation raises the next natural question, which is, if moral law is embedded in reality, and if it carries this deeply personal sense of accountability, what kind of reality could produce that kind of sense and awareness in one's knower, in one's mind and heart? Can moral law exist without mind? Can moral authority exist without a source capable of grounding it? That's the question we're going to explore next. Philosophers have wrestled with this question for centuries. As you wait for video 9 to go live, I suggest that you ponder on this question. Can law exist without a lawgiver? And if not, what might that tell us about the foundation of reality itself? Well, that's it for this video. Until next time, I wish you continued success. Goodbye. God bless. Love you.